All right, here we go. We're talking about the Strzok hearing. That's the thing this week. Yeah, Donald went and talked to Terry, and that was all fun. And the EU's falling apart because, well, socialism. But the Strzok hearing, we learned some interesting stuff this week. So buckle up. All right. So I imagine most of you have heard on the radio or seen on television somewhere. You've stumbled across the clips of Trey Gowdy tearing into Peter Strzok, and probably heard the Gomert comments. I am going to play the clip from Gomert, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about cordiality and the significance of what he said there. But there were some big takeaways. From this. I don't have as many clips as I wanted to. I had some problems with my C-SPAN account earlier. But I do want to also talk about the unsung heroes of the Strzok hearing, and that's Mr. Russell and Mr. Biggs. We'll get to those in just a minute. Let's start with this. The biggest takeaway that I got, because this is something that I didn't already know, which surprises me. It always surprises me when I learn something from one of these hearings. Usually what we get out of these hearings is confirmation of suspicions that we already have. But I actually learned something new that I wasn't expecting. It turns out that before the Russia probe was opened, Strzok was out of scope. I'm going to explain that a little bit more, but let me set the table a little bit. Y'all know Strzok and Peter Strzok and Lisa Page have been sleeping together. Yeah, he's a lying adulterer and all that stuff. And I'm going to go so far as to say I'm pretty sure he's committed treason. And by treason, I mean a coup. He's attempted a coup. So the evidence that we have at hand is that people who were not qualified, and I'll get into that in bigger detail, that's the out-of-scope thing, unqualified people in positions of extraordinary authority and power attempted to conduct their own personal little coup against the duly elected President of the United States. That's a very big claim. I am making an extraordinarily large claim. I am making a bigger claim than what the official claims are. But I can back it up based on the evidence at hand and the testimony that we got from Strzok. And honestly, corroborating evidence just from the fact that Lisa Page dodged her subpoena. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. We've talked about spoliation before. Withholding evidence is similar to destroying evidence in a way. And I'll get into that a little bit in a minute. Now, what do I mean when I say unqualified? This is the thing that I learned from the hearing. This is the big takeaway that just blew my mind. Apparently, wait. So there's a lot of table to set here. There's a lot of table to set here. Now, for those of you who have watched the show, you've heard me talk about the problem with the whole Clinton crime family. Okay, so everybody that is involved in the Russia probe and the Clinton email investigation over at the FBI, everybody in the FBI, with the exception of the lower subordinate agents, all the big dogs, have been in the FBI at high levels of command or management since Clinton was the Secretary of State. Now that means that on Mueller, Rosenstein, Comey, and Strzok's watches, Benghazi happened, Uranium One happened, the breach of the Office of Personnel Management personnel files that compromised the individual secure personal information of essentially our entire employee roll of clandestine operators. The Haitian charity, the Clinton Foundation Haitian charity embezzlement scandal. I think I already said Benghazi. But all of that, way back when, before we ever had the Clinton email scandal, which, by the way, the crime that generated the Clinton email investigation and scandal was ongoing at the same time, and all those people that I just mentioned, Rosenstein, Mueller, Strzok, and Comey, they were all also tied up in that scandal. You see, when these people who were investigating that email scandal exonerated Hillary Clinton, let's not forget, they were also emailing Hillary while she was at the Secretary of State, which she was at the State Department. They were trading emails back and forth with Hillary Clinton as well. So if Hillary had been indicted and eventually convicted on the email scandal, that takes Barack Obama with her, probably the vast majority of the Democratic National Committee, and everybody who's involved at the top end of the Clinton email investigation and the Russia probe. Think about all that for a second. They're telling us that Russia hacked the DNC. But Barry, I thought the 1980s called and they wanted their foreign policy back. You shitburger. So all of these people have been actively involved in conspiracy and crime with the Clinton family since at least near the beginning of the Obama administration, at a minimum. So we've got these people 10 years back actively engaged in conspiracy and crime with Hillary Clinton. And these are the people. Okay, this is before we become aware of the Strzok texts. And these are the people who are investigating the crime. This is as if Al Capone's #1 hitman was the agent who was trying to run him down on tax fraud. Okay, this is the functional equivalent of the sheriff's brother who happens to be his deputy running a corruption investigation. The fact of the matter is, not one person at the top end of the Clinton email investigation or the Russia probe should legitimately be there. Every one of them should have recused themselves for bias far above and beyond the bias against which the AG recused himself from the Russia probe. Now, I don't like Sessions. I liked him as the pick to begin with, but then he immediately flipped over and just turned into a total shitbag. There may be some 4D chess going on there where he's allowing stuff to happen to keep people distracted, but not happy with the AG. I'd love to see Gowdy take that spot, but I think he's tired of messing with it. Now, so the big stuff right now is what's going on with Strzok and Page. The first thing that should terrify everybody is the fact that Lisa Page dodged a subpoena and didn't go to jail. Oh, well, she came in the next day for behind closed door session. Yeah? Did she show up when the subpoena was issued? Did she show up for the time that she was subpoenaed? No? Then put her ass in jail. You'd do it to me if I didn't show up. I missed jury duty one time. They issued a warrant for my arrest. That warrant found its way to my command team because I was stationed out of state. What happened was they sent a jury summons to my old address, and I had been enlisted for 3 years and was already stationed, 4 years, and was already stationed in Hawaii after having lived in a shitload of other places. And so I was no longer in Georgia to be jury summons, and, got it straightened out. But the point there is, the second I missed that legal order to appear in point A, they went to lock my ass up. But not Lisa Page. No, 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 no. Now, let's look at Strzok, because Strzok is the one that we've got the new information on. What we learned from this hearing, and I know I've kind of drug you along on this one, what we learned in this hearing is that Strzok was out of scope. In the months leading up to the Russia investigation, Strzok was out of scope. Now, get your head clear on this. Peter Strzok, who claims that he acted without bias, and he doesn't just claim that he acted without bias, he claims that he doesn't have bias. He claims that he does not have bias. The argument he makes on that is that I have personal political opinions like everybody does. And then he goes on to say it's a master stroke of what did he say? Obfuscation and confusion that you've gotten the American people to confuse bias with personal opinion. No, personal opinion. Bias is your personal opinion. Okay? If you prefer red roses to yellow ones, you have a pro-red rose bias. That's what a bias is. Strzok goes further than to claim that bias did not affect his decision, and actually says, I do not have bias. Which, that statement alone is utterly belied by the text messages. And we know he's a liar. We know he's a liar. We know for sure he's a liar. And how do we know?
Gentleman from Texas will suspend for a moment.
There is the disgrace. And it won't be recaptured anytime soon because of the damage you've done to the justice system. And I've talked to FBI agents around the country. You've embarrassed them. You've embarrassed yourself. And I can't help but wonder, when I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
Credibility of a witness
Shame
is
on you,
always
Mr.
an
Chairman.
issue.
Mr. Chairman, please.
Have you Mr. Chairman, this is intolerable harassment of the witness.
What's wrong with that? You need your medication.
The gentleman controls the time.
That's how we know he's a liar. He's an adulterer. All right. Now, adultery for uniformed service members is a crime. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, adultery is a crime. For a civilian, adultery is not a crime. But, buddy, if I know you cheat on your wife, and you ask me to loan you $10 till Friday, I don't trust you to pay me back. Because you're a liar. Because your word doesn't have value. And as y'all heard in the clip, the Democrats just lost their stuff. Just lost their shit. Oh, you're crazy. It doesn't matter. Okay. I've gone back and forth with some of my buddies about that statement this week. And there's some complaint, and I think it's legitimate, that Gohmert kind of played a cheap trick, kind of took a cheap shot, and tried to hit the emotional hammer there with it. But the fact that Strzok is an adulterer does speak to his character, and it speaks to his integrity, both of which he has in utter void, obviously. They both speak to the quality of the man, and that quality is garbage. leading up to the time when Strzok, and this is, I cannot overstate the importance of this. Strzok is the initiating official. Strzok personally started the investigation that is being so frequently referred to as the Trump-Russia collusion investigation. And that's a whole bundle of shit to pick apart right there. For starters, Strzok was in charge of the counterintelligence department. That's how it got initiated in the counterintelligence sphere. There is not now and never has been any evidence that Donald Trump or his campaign members actively colluded with the Russians. Collusion, there is no such crime as collusion. The reason that the word collusion has been used so frequently is because if you use the word conspired, you're alleging a crime. And when you allege a crime without evidence, that is a very serious matter. So they use the word collusion because that's not actually a crime. In the absence of evidence of a crime, a criminal investigation cannot be initiated. And in the absence of the ability to initiate a criminal investigation to impugn the president, they opened a counterintelligence probe into Russia, hoping that that could initiate a fishing expedition where they could make some shit up. And after 2 years, people who were clearly biased against the president, and I do mean Strzok, Page, Mueller, and Rosenstein, people who have a clear animus against the United States and its duly elected president, they have failed to generate any meaningful evidence or any meaningful claims of wrongdoing. And if there was ever any doubt that a major animus, a major motivating factor in the initiation of the Russia probe to begin with was to impugn and weaken the position of the President of the United States of America, that should have been laid to rest when they chose the day that Trump was meeting with Putin to release 13 individual indictments against Russian citizens from the Mueller probe. Mueller was Hillary's Comey. He was the director of the FBI under Hillary. Rosenstein's been floating around in the vice position for a while. I mean vice as in second fiddle, not drugs and sex. And of course Comey was Daddy Durfee under Barry O. And here we are at Out of Scope. When you deal with sensitive information, like, for example, the highly classified special access programs information that was found on the Hillary Clinton emails, for example, you have to have a top secret, secure compartmentalized information clearance. You have to be cleared for top secret level information and stuff that's need to know only. Person in Strzok's position, Strzok, Mueller, Rosenstein, Lisa Page, almost certainly, they all have to have TS-SCI clearances. That's the clearance the president has. That's the tippy top. Peter Strzok, when he initiated the investigation, the Russia probe, was out of scope. Which means that he had been given a polygraph, a lie detector test, to determine his qualification to continue to hold a top secret, secure compartmentalized information clearance, and he had failed it. Now, in the hearing, he goes back and forth and quibbles over definitions. Oh, I was out of scope. That's not the same as failing it. Yes, it is, because what out of scope means is that the polygraph test was uncertain that you were speaking the truth. And that makes me wonder if the thing that he was suspected of lying about was either his fidelity to his wife or the fact that he was an adulterer. The funny thing about adultery, and even if you're uniformed, even if you're a uniformed service member, one of the funny things about being an adulterer, or even before when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in place, and they would ask you the question if you were a homosexual or anything like that. Hell, some of the questions go to, have you ever engaged in bestiality? We don't care, really, functionally, as far as you being able to do your job, if you've done these things. Even when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a thing, we didn't care if you were gay when you're doing the polygraph. What we care is if that's something that you're sufficiently embarrassed about that you'll try to hide it and lie about it, because that would mean that you're vulnerable to being blackmailed with that information, which makes you a security threat. So I would really, really love to see what it was that Strzok lied about, because the fact of the matter is that Strzok being out of compliance, out of scope, if he wasn't busted for lying about fucking one of his employees, then he's into some other dirty shit. And that's a big problem. So it very well may be that he's even crookeder than just a coup initiating adulterer. Now, that would also mean that his clearance should have been revoked, and at a minimum held until he could be polygraphed. But really, once you've busted that polygraph, your ass ought to be gone. I mean, gone. Because you're a security threat. And now that we've seen what's going on here, I mean, how could he more clearly have been a security threat? I mean, this is a man who actively worked to undermine the U.S. Elections. So he goes on and on and on about what he thinks the definition of bias is, and how that's different from having a personal opinion. The unsung heroes here are Biggs and Russell. Biggs and Russell both dug into the question of what the regulations say. Biggs dug into the regulations. I may have them backwards. And Russell explained to Strzok, who apparently doesn't have enough legal understanding to process this very complex information. Biggs explained to Russell explained to Strzok how culpability is determined from actus rei and mens rea. So a crime has two factors, has two parts: actus rei, the guilty act, and mens rea, the guilty mind. You have to do something wrong, and you have to have done it on purpose. That's where we get crime. Now, an exception to that being, of course, if there's a question of liability, or a statute where the standard of commission rises to gross negligence. Like, for example, with the Hillary Clinton emails, where she was clearly in violation, clearly mishandled the email, at a minimum by gross negligence. As we've established on this show through examining that evidence, there has never been a clearer case of provable intent ever. And that's part of what I feel terrible now. I get the two of them mixed up. Either Biggs or Russell goes into how intent is established. And that, of course, in any criminal case where intent was at question, because intent is necessarily, until we start putting psychics and telepaths in our criminal investigation divisions, intent is necessarily and always has been established with circumstantial evidence. It has to be that way. There's not another way to do it unless you have a confession from the criminal, Like, for example, a non-disclosure agreement that Hillary Clinton signed long before she established her private email server. So, barring a signed statement of intent to commit crime and an understanding of the definitions of the crime you intend to commit, like a non-disclosure agreement signed by Hillary Clinton before the email scandal, barring that, intent is established through circumstantial evidence, almost exclusively. And I think that's what Russell explains in this one. It's either Russell or Biggs in this one.
Those text messages, end quote. Inspector General Horowitz stated in his report that those derogatory texts were, quote, not only indicative of a biased state of mind, end quote, but were also, quote, antithetical to the core values of the FBI and the Department of Justice, end quote.
Okay, I'm going to go back to that clip. We're going to watch the whole clip in just a second, but I want to tag that real quick too. Throughout the whole hearing, Strzok said over and over and over again, well, you've got the IG report there, and several of the Democrats held it up and waved it around. We're disturbed by the fact that you read this report where the IG said that there was no bias found. No, he didn't. He didn't. What the IG report found is that there is no testimonial evidence to support the claim of bias or to prove the influence of bias. However, and this is from the IG report, and Russell's going to read it to you too. However, there is no way to rule out bias where it is clearly apparent in this case. That's what the IG report says. Here's
The gentleman from Texas will suspend for a moment.
There is the disgrace, and it won't be
I'm sorry. I hit too many buttons too fast. I'll do that again. Here is Russell.
Those text messages, end quote. Inspector General Horowitz stated in his report that those derogatory texts were, quote, not only indicative of a biased state of mind, end quote, but were also, quote, antithetical to the core values of the FBI and the Department of Justice, end quote. He stated further that such actions implicated, quote, provisions in the FBI's offensive code and penalty guidelines, end quote, and referred information to the FBI for adjudication, which is still outstanding. You stated today, quote, at no time did personal beliefs enter into decisions I made, end quote. Yet Mr. Horowitz's report stated, quote, in assessing Strzok's decision to prioritize the Russian investigation over following up on the mid-year related investigative lead discovered on the Wiener laptop in October 2016, these text messages led us to conclude that we did not have confidence that Strzok's decision was free from bias, end quote. You stated today that culture, training, and policy prevent bias in the FBI. They would be noted and stopped. The Justice Department ethical guidelines state the following, quote, superiors may never send to subordinate opinions about the candidates and issues if the expression is political activity directed at the success or failure of a political party, candidate, or partisan political office or partisan political group. The expression is not permitted while the employee is on duty, end quote. The FBI Domestic Investigations and Operation Guide in section 3.1, because we've heard so much about the adherence of policies and what these things do, that's why it's important to quote them, and I quote in section 3.1, we who enforce the law must not merely obey it, this is the FBI guideline, we have an obligation to set a moral example that those whom we protect can follow. Because the FBI's success in accomplishing its mission is directly related to the support and cooperation of those we protect, these core values are the fiber that holds together the vitality of our institution, end quote.
Okay, and that's like a 7 or 8 minute clip, so I'm not going to play the whole thing. Also, those statements are so black and white. Is not permitted. Cannot be ruled out. It's, I mean, good God. Black and white. Black and white in the FBI regulations, he is absolutely not allowed to be involved in this investigation. The fact that he initiated the investigation, that fact alone, should shut down the whole thing, because it calls the legitimacy of the initiation into drastic concern. And then, not permitted. Okay, and then they talk about the prioritization of the Russia probe over the Wiener thing, the Wiener laptop thing. So they went into the Wiener laptop. Okay, Wiener is Huma Abedin's husband. They're divorced now. It's a damn soap opera up there. Oh. And yes, regulations do need to be that clear-cut. There's a reason they're that clear-cut. Kind of like the regulations on haircuts, right, babe? Jesus Christ, that's a whole... That's a whole other conversation we had at supper time. Damn, there was another thing that Russell said in there. Oh, yeah. So, above and beyond all of the clear problems with the investigation itself, the fact that Strzok is involved, even if he in earnest was completely unbiased and did everything by the book, and yeah, that I'm highly doubtful of that possibility. But even if that were the case, even if he were completely unbiased and by the book, the appearance, the very hard to ignore appearance of clear bias is a huge detriment to all law enforcement in this country, because what he was talking about, because the very people that we protect are the people that we investigate, and often the sources of the information for those investigations. Who among us now, as conservatives, feels that they can trust the FBI or any of their subordinate law enforcement departments to fairly treat with us? How many places across the country, outside of the clear bias, the clear anti-Trump, anti-conservative, anti-white bias that we've been seeing out of the FBI, and frankly a lot of the intelligence community? But look around the country when you see Antifa protests and black masked terrorists are setting fire to universities and storefronts and churches, and you've got governors and mayors telling their police forces to stand down and just let the mob let them do what they do. Really? But then you have a group like the Charlottesville protest, the Unite the Right. Guys, Unite the Right, the Charlottesville protest, I'm not a big fan. Okay, I'm not a white nationalist, I'm not a white supremacist. But Americans have the right to protest. They have the right to assemble peacefully. They have the right to demonstrate. They have the right to speak. In the Charlottesville situation, a group applied for permits, which is ludicrous on the face of it given the First Amendment to begin with, to have a rally and assembly. And the mayor of the city and the governor of the state, one of them rejected the permit. The ACLU sued, that's a whole other thing. ACLU sued to have the permit reinstated, and then the governor declared a state of emergency and called in the National Guard on a group of protesters before any violence occurred. I wonder why there was violence there. Oh, wait, because after 1,000 people showed up in support of the Unite the Right rally, several thousand Antifa and anti-free speech protesters showed up to do violence. And what did they do after they showed up to do violence? They did violence. The shit that Strzok's doing only further undermines the confidence that we do have in our law enforcement agencies to treat fairly with us, to use credible intelligence when we give it to them, if we give it to them. He has damaged the expectation of law enforcement for usable, timely, credible, and actionable intelligence to be provided by human intelligence sources for years to come. The damage that Strzok with his bias has done to the FBI should be treated not differently than if an individual terrorist were to bomb an FBI building. Because the damage that Strzok has done, quite intentionally, and that's what we're about to hear about, the establishment of intent, quite intentionally, Strzok has acted with clear intent to commit crime and cause harm. And that is how he should be treated.
Criminal investigator for at least 20 years, isn't that right?
National security investigator, primarily CI work, which within the Bureau we differentiate criminal, which is...
But you're familiar with criminal investigations,
yes, sir.
Correct? And you understand that as you're aggregating evidence, you're looking for a couple areas. Number one, you're looking to see if there's an act, the actus reus of a crime, right?
Yes.
You're also looking for culpable mental state of a crime, right?
Yes.
You have to demonstrate the culpable mental state if you're going to bring a case forward, right? Intentional, knowingly, reckless, etc., right?
Almost always, yes.
Yeah, unless there's some kind of strict liability, right? And you'd agree that short of some statement against interest, most of the time the culpable mental state of either intentional or knowingly, that's usually done through circumstantial evidence, correct?
I hesitate to generalize. I would
trust me.
I don't know that I could answer
trust
that
me.
question,
It is. It is, because short of someone making a statement against interest, you've got to prove that they intended not only every element of the offense, right, or knowingly did that offense. That has to be proved, and oftentimes it's by circumstantial evidence, which, by the way, there's a jury instruction typically that goes forward that says there's no qualitative difference between circumstantial evidence and direct evidence. You'd agree with that statement, right?
So I'm not an attorney. I would.
Well, you've been in the court many times, right?
Well,
you sure sound like an attorney sometimes,
very
right?
Educated recitations of legal terms that I don't have the education to be able to respond to.
Okay, well, trust me on that. There's a jury instruction that says...
If you're representing to me that's accurate, I will
right.
accept that.
Right, and then this morning, you said, and then this has been a theme, and I don't know how many umpteen times you said it, but I wrote down the one quote you gave to Chairman Goodlatte. You said, quote, "My text messages are not indicative of bias," close quote. Do you still hold to that position?
I do.
Okay. Now, as we go forward here, when the FBI is trying to put together circumstantial evidence of a culpable mental state, they're looking at things such as text messages. They're looking at things such as communications between people for whatever reason, right? You'd agree with that?
I would.
Yeah. And so that indicates someone's mental state that you're going to take before a jury where you're going to say, beyond a reasonable doubt, we can demonstrate either intentional or knowing by this series, this accumulation of circumstantial evidence, right?
Rephrase the question, please, sir. I'm not...
Okay, this is not hard. So when you're trying to prove a culpable mental state,
yes.
most of it's coming from circumstantial evidence, very rarely, unless you've got a confession, right?
Yes.
And so you're taking accumulation of various pieces of evidence and you're saying,
yes.
look, this adds up to intentional or knowingly, right?
Agreed.
So one of the things that's been made evident here is that your statements and your communications with Ms. Page, it wasn't a one-off. It wasn't two. It wasn't three. This is a whole series. It's a whole series that goes on not for a day or a week. This goes on for a long period of time. Is that not true?
It is true.
Yeah. And so when people begin to say, was there bias on the part of Peter Strzok, they're not saying, oh, gee, on this one, just on August 8th. They're going for a whole accumulation and aggregation of various statements that you made and that Ms. Page made as well. So that leads us to the IG statement. So when the Inspector General comes in and I ask him the question, I said, look, you've said regarding Mr. Strzok and Ms. Page, you didn't find documentary testimony evidence that they had improper considerations, including political bias, directly affecting. I said, that's directly affecting, because you said they weren't the sole decision makers. I said, did they indirectly affect it? He said, yeah. Why? Because he said, you were the lead investigator of the Hillary Clinton. You were the liaison, if you will. You were the flow of information from the investigative team that you...
All right, that's enough. So let me just make sure that y'all are clear on what Biggs just said there. When he got to question Horowitz, in Horowitz's testimony before the same committee on Horowitz's findings about the investigation through the IG report, Horowitz stated on the record under oath that he didn't say maybe their bias had an indirect effect. He said absolutely. He said yes. Under oath, penalty of perjury, the investigator, the IG, said yes, it had to have had at least an indirect effect. Now, the Democrats but I repeat myself, Strzok, they tapped that report over and over and over again. He said there was no proof of interference, there was no proof of bias or interference. No, he said there was no testimonial proof of direct effect, which I call that claim into question too. But the fact that he absolutely said that there was absolutely an indirect effect at a minimum, that's all it takes. As you are not qualified to make these decisions, to conduct this investigation. And thank you, babe, for saying he's not smart enough to follow that line means he wasn't qualified to be in charge of an investigative bureau. Yes, that's right. Y'all just heard Strzok there. He's not very bright. He clearly doesn't have a good grasp on the meat and potatoes of his profession. Right? I used to work in that world. I used to do that stuff. I know my shit because I read books and study my shit. Strzok apparently, I don't know how he fucking frat boyed his way up to the tippy top like that. Oh. Maybe he got a taste of Rosenstein or Mueller, who knows? Or maybe he was in Bill Clinton's fraternity. That'd be worth looking up. Oh no, babe. I see your message. We are saying he did it. I'm saying that Strzok is absolutely guilty. Not just that Strzok wasn't qualified or shouldn't have been trusted to conduct these investigations, but that what Strzok and Page did is they attempted to conduct a coup. They attempted to conduct a coup against the President of the United States.
You're a mean, mad white man.
But I stick to it. That's what I see, and I'm calling it like I see it. Guys, yes, Rod, absolutely a psychopath. I don't understand how a person could sit there and lie the way that he does with a straight face without being a complete psychopath. Maybe a sociopath. But I won't even go the Sherlock route and give him high-functioning sociopath because clearly he's not a book reader. He's not a hard thinking man. Now, I've almost run out the clock. It's 1:45, and frankly, I've got to go get rid of this coffee in the not too distant future. But there's another little thing I just want to touch on. I had intended to talk more about this earlier, but one of the things that occurred repeatedly in the course of this hearing that just absolutely raised my hackles. Strzok and the Democrats, they were sweating. They were scared of what's going on. Strzok was employing some bullshit tactics. Every time he was asked a question, he would answer it in slow, careful, rehearsed, circumlocutive. He was clearly going out of his way to waste time. Okay, so each representative is given 5 minutes to ask questions. Strzok would answer questions slowly and carefully, and it's one of those things where you can tell the difference. He would use a lot of unnecessarily descriptive language, use a lot of extra adjectives, and as you saw in that last clip, he's clearly not a lawyer. He clearly doesn't have a legal education or a clear grasp on the workings of legal questions, or, I don't know, his actual fucking job. But he spent a lot of time wasting time. Another trick he pulled a lot is for the first half of the hearing, almost every question that was asked, he would say, "I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. The FBI has directed that I cannot answer that question." And, you know, there were several times where he was asked questions about the individual text messages. Say, I don't remember writing that text message. I don't remember saying that thing. I don't remember this. I don't remember that. Oh, but apparently he memorized a list of about 6,500 specific questions that the FBI told him he can't answer. Then they recessed. While they were in recess, the Republican senators in the House, the Republican representatives contacted the FBI, whoever the general counsel at the FBI or whatever higher-ups they needed to, and had clarification guidance. In the second half of the hearing, reps who had asked questions that had been shot down by Strzok, citing that FBI guidance says I can't answer that question or I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. I'm going to get back to that in a second, too. Reps that had asked those kinds of questions, other Republican reps yielded their time back to people like Trey Gowdy so he could re-ask questions that he had been stonewalled on earlier. After the clarification was given, and it was the case that during the recess, Gowdy and Goodlatte and some of the reps had discussed, okay, these are the questions that we want to ask. We're going to ask the FBI guidance on asking these questions. The FBI gave clear guidance that, yes, Strzok can answer these questions. The fact of the matter is Strzok is under subpoena, so he is obligated to answer those questions. And then, even after all of that, having the FBI change the guidance or clarify the guidance for Strzok, so on and so forth, Strzok continued to refuse to answer questions. So, like, Gowdy would get his 5 minutes to ask questions, and he'd ask questions for 4.5 minutes, and Strzok would sit there and answer each question. FBI guidance says I can't answer that question. That's an ongoing investigation. Blah, 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 blah. And then, at the 4-minute and 35-second mark, one of the lawyers sitting behind Strzok would lean forward and give him clarification. Oh, no, you can answer all of those questions. And Strzok would then speak up. I've just been given clarification. I can answer that question, and that question, and I would like to. And then that's the moment where, buzzer, sorry, the time of the gentleman has expired. And he did that every time the questions came back around, so we refused to answer those questions. Additionally, all through the whole hearing, the Democrats kept wasting time by interrupting and running their mouths and making a big spectacle and running out the clock to prevent Republicans from being able to ask questions, calling up ludicrous points of order and all kind of crap like that. And even, it was either 3 or 4 times, they called for a roll call vote on a ruling of order. And that, you're talking about a roll call vote of 75 assembled House members in a joint committee, in a joint hearing of 2 committees, where half the 75 members sit on both committees, and they have to answer, the ones that sit on both committees have to answer twice, as they roll call Committee A and they roll call Committee, because it's House Judiciary Committee and the House Oversight Committee. And they just kept playing these silly brinksmanship games to waste time or run out the clock because they're sweating. They know that what has happened here is that high-profile members of the FBI and everyone involved at the top end of the Clinton email investigation and the Russia probe are not just acting in bad faith, they are in the active commission of crime against the United States. And this is the last thing I want to leave you with. At one point, or actually at a few points during the hearing, when the issue of the Clinton emails came up, Strzok made it a point to defend Clinton and to say that she had been exonerated by that investigation. And then when questions were asked about the investigation, he claimed that he was not allowed to comment on ongoing investigations. Here's the problem. If Hillary Clinton has been exonerated by the email investigation, that means that the investigation is closed. If the investigation is ongoing, then she has not been exonerated. So for him to say that she has been exonerated, not only does that illustrate his clear bias by prejudging her guilt or innocence before the investigation is concluded, which we already know him to have done, given that he, with Comey, drafted the exoneration letter, which was read by Comey before being conferred to the AG Lynch. Strzok and Comey drafted that letter, and it was Strzok, along with a couple of FBI lawyers and Comey, who decided to replace the language of gross negligence, which is an actual criminal terminology, with the language extremely careless. Gross negligence is an official judicial term. Extremely careless means the same thing. There is not a meaningful distinction between gross negligence and extreme carelessness. Those two things are less different than a large ice cream and a giant gelato. There's less eggs in one. Gross negligence and extreme carelessness are less different than grilled tilapia and fried tilapia. Okay? Just phrasing it that way makes a liar of him. So, and of course, the fact that he tried to have it both ways, that he claimed she had been exonerated and then claimed that the case is open, both things cannot be true. And when you make two mutually exclusive statements of fact under oath, you have perjured yourself. Period. There is no alternative position. If two things cannot be simultaneously true, and under oath, under penalty of perjury, you claim for both of them to be true, you have perjured yourself. So, conclusion? The traitorous adulterer attempted a coup with his mistress and then perjured himself to the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I've got for tonight. I'll see you next Sunday. Make sure you're here. I'm sure it'll be another great one because I'm a genius. I love you. I need you to keep watching the show. Tell your friends. Get the subscriber numbers up. And until then, remember, if you build a man a fire, you'll keep him warm for the evening. But if you set a man on fire, he'll be warm for the rest of his life. Good night.
Thank you.